Well, good afternoon and welcome. I'm Mark Becker, one of APLU's newest employees as the new president since September 1st, and it's my pleasure to welcome you to APLU's third Hispanic Heritage Month celebration event. This event in recognition of Hispanic Heritage Month is one manifestation of APLU's commitment to Latino students, faculty, and staff at our member institutions. And as mentioning our member institutions, I'd like to give a quick shout out to several of our members who just recently in September 2022 received the Seal of Excellencia. That'd be our colleagues in Albany, New York at the University at Albany, in Arlington, Texas at UT Arlington, over in San Marcos at Texas State, and then out in Santa Cruz at UC Santa Cruz. So congratulations to all of you and to your institutions. It's a fine achievement and recognition of your important work. It's my pleasure to introduce you to our one of our stars here at APLU, Andrea Rodriguez, is our director for the Coalition of Urban Serving Universities, and she's going to be the moderator for today's webinar. Andrea herself is a first-generation high school and college graduate. Her parents are immigrants from Uruguay and Ecuador. She holds 2 master's degrees and, very importantly, is a recently minted doctor, having recently received her PhD. And I think her dissertation title will give you some idea of why she is the moderator today for this session. Andrea's dissertation was entitled "The Journey to an Advanced Degree Completion, the Lived Experience of Latinos Focused on Sharing Successful Stories of Latinos with Graduate Degrees to Shift the Narrative from Deficit Framing to Asset Framing, and use these successes stories to counteract negative cultural portrayals of Latina graduate students." Andrea is an integral member of our APLU team, of our Coalition of Urban Serving Universities community and team. And we're excited to have her here today, both to share her personal experience and to moderate this panel. Andrea, it's all yours.
Thank you so much, Dr. Becker. And thank you everyone for joining us today. I can't see everyone, I can only see the speakers, but I'm sure there's lots of people there. I would be remiss if I would not give a shout out. I don't give a shout out to my familia que están llamando from Sudamérica. I see you, I hear you. Los quiero mucho. Okay, so without further ado, I want everyone to hear and get to know our panelists because I'm super excited and I'm sure everyone is. So I'm gonna kick this off with Ann Gates. If each of you can introduce yourself with your name, role, and institution, and close out with, what does Hispanic Heritage Month mean to you personally? Ann Gates?
Yeah, thank you, Andrea. It's really a pleasure to be here. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Ann Gates. I'm Senior Vice Provost for Faculty Affairs at the University of Texas, El Paso. UTEP is one of 21 Hispanic Serving Institutions that is in the very high research category. It is the largest Mexican-American majority university, and it's driven by a commitment to broaden participation to increase Hispanic student persistence, in particular in STEM. I also served 12 years as chair of computer science at UTEP. It is, when I think about Hispanic Heritage Month, it's really a time for me to reflect, to think about my culture, the wonderful traditions that were passed on to me by my parents around food, family, music, and our contributions throughout history. In particular, I come from a family where my uncles and my father were in the armed forces. So really celebrating our contribution to the United States, to the armed forces, and being public servants is really a point of pride. But in addition, I really see Hispanic Heritage Month as providing awareness of our heritage to the broader community, to students, to faculty and administrators. And at UTEP, we hold a series of events and seminars to celebrate Hispanic Heritage Month.
Well, thank you so much, Ann. Marianne Villarreal, question to you. Name, role, institution, and what does Hispanic Heritage Month mean to you?
Well, thank you and congratulations, Dr. Rodriguez. Monumental moment, and you know, my heart to your family too, to have you here. I mean, what a tremendous moment of milestones. of one of many milestones to come, I imagine. And I am the inaugural Vice President for Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion at the University of Utah. And I say inaugural, though I started this division in 2019, COVID, new president. I've hit the reset button several times here. So I really feel like this year, this last 12, 14 months, we have really started to guide and build out the work of equity, diversity, inclusion across a large complex campus that includes a school of medicine, a health system, health sciences. And we are an emerging HSI at our undergraduate population, sitting around 14.2%. We recently hired a Latinx program manager to start coordinating all the efforts across campus to ensure that we can start the conversation of what does it mean to become, what is becoming, long before we are. And we think that is a critical conversation on this campus, and people doing fabulous work. You know, what it means to me, I have to tell you, I grew up in my world that I grew up in a small rural town in Texas. There were only Mexicanos. I didn't know that there were other kinds of populations, of Latinos, of Hispanics. I grew up Mexican American. That's all I knew. And so, you know, this when I'm you know, I'm trying to understand what is Hispanic Heritage Month, I'm trying to understand what is Hispanic, right, and thinking about who all we are and the history of that. Certainly, you know, the history of it with Lyndon B. Johnson in Texas and his affinity towards Mexican American populations, and the Democratic Party was a huge part of that. You know, but to Dr. Gates' point, you know, is that you know, what it means for me today and our opportunity to do this work is that we get to really, and the role that I have is to think about the nuances, the complexities of our Latinidad, whether it's our queerness, our neurodiversity, right, our ability, who we are as family, what does familia mean, how do we engage, how do we build community, and all of those pieces together. And so it is always for us, I call it equity, disruption and inclusion, and our opportunities to really disrupt some norms around how people stereotype and think about our communities.
Well, thank you so much for that. And last, but definitely not least, Javier Reyes, name, institution, and role, and then what does Hispanic Heritage mean to you?
Thank you, Andrea. And, I'm Javier Reyes. I'm interim chancellor here at the University of Illinois, Chicago, permanent provost, but serving as interim chancellor at the moment. I would say that the Hispanic Heritage Month, what it means to me, it's a celebration moment. And the most important thing that I always look for in Hispanic Heritage Month is that it's not celebrating something that is happening only during this month, but that every day throughout the year, we're doing things. We have our communities really celebrating their culture, their art, the food, their language, our education, and our roots. But this month allows us to really focus the attention of the nation, sometimes the world, on something that really reflects the Hispanic heritage that we have. But I always like to tell my teams and tell people, this is not only happening during this month. This is happening throughout the year, every day. We just happen to showcase it this month. So that's, and it comes from, many of you may have heard this, in Mexico, we celebrate Mother's Day on May 10th every time. But every mom that you can ask in Mexico will tell you, but Mother's Day is every day of the year. We just happen to give a special day where you can all give moms hugs and kisses and gifts, but every day we celebrate Mother's Day. So I think it's that notion that I carry with Hispanic Heritage Month, that it's not about what happens this month. It's about what happens every day of the year. We just happen to celebrate it and showcase it on this month.
We absolutely agree. I think the idea and the notion and sort of what we believe in La Cultura, this Hispanic Heritage Month, it isn't only 1 month, right? It's the entire year, todos los minutos. We celebrate everything. Someone's getting married, so if there's a birthday, someone passed a test, someone failed the test, we're going to celebrate it with food, con amor. That's just inherent in La Cultura Nuestra. So I'm glad that you all touched on that. in your responses. And thank you so much for joining us. And I welcome each of you. And I'm excited to hear your thoughts and your responses, because I think not just me, but I think the folks who are on this call who have joined us are also excited to hear from really phenomenal leaders who are in the field changing the game on behalf of our culture and our people. And I really appreciate that. So I'm going to kick off the first question. Ann Gates, you touched on this a little bit in the conversation, so I wanted to pass this question on to you. How has your institution leveraged funding and resources for current and future Latino learners?
Yeah, that's really a good question. And I wanted to start off first by talking about the Includes Alliance, and NSF Includes Alliance that I lead, and that's the Computing Alliance of Hispanic Serving Institutions, and its focus on recruitment, retention, advancement of Hispanics in computing. And the reason that we focus on that is because there's such a low representation of Hispanics in the computing field. While there's 20% post-secondary degrees awarded to Latinos, only 11% of post-secondary degrees are awarded to Latinx, 8% at master's level and 6% at the doctoral level in computer science. So CASI has been funded by the NSF Broadening Participation in Computing Program since 2006. And then in 2018, we became funded by the NSF Includes program. We started out with a network of 7 institutions, HSIs, and now we're around over 80. And we work with industry, nonprofit, and other partners to serve as a unified voice for what needs to be done to accelerate and change the numbers in computing fields. So what CASI has done is it has defined a set of signature practices that provide support structures to support learning inside and outside the classroom, problem solving, undergraduate research. Just this last year, 2021, we received additional funding from NSF Broadening Participation in Computing program to focus on graduate studies, because the numbers are extremely low in graduate studies. I mean, when you look at computer science programs, you're lucky if you find one Latino. It's really hard to, the support structures are just not there because there are emerging HSIs, right? Many of the R1 HSIs are emerging. They have reached 25%. This year, we were able to leverage funding from Google. Google gave us a gift of $4.8 million to also leverage the work that we're doing to start building research capacity. So these are the things that we have been working on. At UTEP, we have funding from the NSF through the Provost's office, and I'm leading transformational change, looking at shifts in mindset, behavior, policies, and procedures and processes to sustain and support an equitable culture. We're using models around inclusive excellence as a framework for us to do our work. And then just recently, we received additional funding from the Department of Education to move more toward knowledge and data-driven decision-making, really looking at the data, the intersectionality of data, department level, college level, university level, to really begin to identify areas that we can be more strategic, providing more diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility, professional development for faculty, so that we're moving inclusion into classroom practices. And then we're also expanding the academic support services to address the learning loss that was exacerbated by COVID-19. So looking more at providing those basic needs, the structures to support food insecurity, housing insecurity that arose during this time. So those are the main things that we're working on.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Dr. Gates. Dr. Villarreal or Dr. Reyes, I want to give you both an opportunity to provide any other input or insight you may have to that question.
I'm happy to talk a little bit of one of the things that we're doing, as again, similar to Dr. Gates, reaching out to other institutions, forming the Hispanic Serving Research Universities Alliance, where Research One universities have banded together with one sole purpose of trying to, what I characterize in a very simplistic term, the chicken and an egg problem. We know we have many students in our institutions and others that would like to see themselves reflected in the faculty, who's in front of the classroom, who's leading these institutions. And we're not having enough graduate students that would be able to take positions in academia, at least not in large enough numbers where we would see the increase in representation. It's not happening fast enough. So the HSRU Alliance was formed specifically with the objective of doubling the number of Hispanic seeking students with a PhD seeking students in the institutions of the Alliance, with the idea of putting them out there to really populate academia. We're working with NSF, we're working with different agencies, requesting even with Congress, requesting for funding that would allow us to do this, because as you know, there's part of academia that really doesn't come with new resources. When you're trying to do PhD programs, those are costly endeavors, especially where we need them in the STEM areas, or even in the creative sides and the humanities. These are costly endeavors to recruit more students. So we're looking for resources to expand our capabilities with the objective of 5-6 years being able to have that expansion of graduating Hispanics with PhD holding degrees to go to academia, not only in Research One universities, but across the nation.
Thank you so much, Dr. Reyes.
I'll name 4 quick areas that we are making, that we've invested significant time, talent, dollars on from our communities. So we, folks say Utah and they don't think Latino, right? We're 15% of the population, the fastest growing population, the second largest population. We have West Valley City, which is now a majority, the first majority city of, with again, half that 51,000 Latinos living in West Valley City. So the demographics of Utah has been fast-paced growing. And so what is the responsibility, right, of the University of Utah on that? The first is addressing the social determinants of health. If our future learners are going to be at the University of Utah, we have to be invested in the health. So we are in the process of a new hospital in that area, a West Valley project that is also an educational center. So we'll build in the communities that we serve, as well as a partnership with our Salt Lake Community College and our Harriman campus, right? So recognizing that we just can't be the beautiful campus up on the hill, we have to be everywhere as part of that. As I mentioned earlier, we hired Pamela Capastoro from Stetson University, who joined us as our Latinx program manager and is leading some charges with our health sciences. We're calling Saturday academies that are built for families. And out of our relationship with Latinos in Action, those are called Sábado Gigantes. So we're really building out in the everyday in the community again, recognizing that families are invested, right, in their children, and we have to talk with them earlier, and we have to answer questions earlier and hold ourselves accountable earlier in their lives on that. I'd say that one of the other pieces that I'll just name very quickly, certainly we're involved, with Excelencia to really rethink how we do student success on a frame of Latino students. But we also have a partnership, our new Leadership Academy. We've built a partnership with AHI, the American Association of Hispanics in Higher Ed, on our Leadership Academy, which is, and we've had the great fortune of, having this last year, 35 fellows. It's a national program. We'll have, again, about 30 fellows, many from minority serving or HSI or APLU institutions. So really thinking about who we are, where we need to be, and staying the course.
Thank you all for your responses. I think each of you touched on something that's a really great segue into the next question on the low number of Latinos, Latina, Latinx folks in the graduate studies and the graduate professional sector, but also thinking about when we talk about student success, is that inclusive of graduate work, or are we solely thinking about undergraduate, right? So reshifting our mindset to really think about, let's pull in and think about the graduate learners. So to that end, I'm gonna start this question off and kick it to you, Dr. Villarreal. How can public universities and partners support Latino students' completion journey in graduate and professional programs?
Dr. Mike Good, Senior Vice President for Academic Affairs and Health Sciences, says this all the time. Why are we ignoring our backyard? We have such incredible talent into the health professionals, health science professions. So that's part of our Saturday Academy, is building from from our students, and not just our students, right? We have incredible students who are graduating from Weber, who are graduating from USU, UVU. We should be cultivating the talent of Utah into our graduate programs. And I think we're doing that in that health sciences space at this time. So, I think we all know what the strengths of our university, where we can be and build and model. And that's how we grow. We model, and then we say, okay, is this working? Let's try it somewhere else. And if it's not working, let's not create any harm, and let's try something else pretty quickly.
Thank you for that. Dr. Gates, Dr. Reyes, anything else to add to that question?
Yeah, I'd like to add, Javier, unless you had something that you wanted to say.
I have something brief, but please go ahead.
Okay, I really enjoyed hearing what Marianne said, and Andrea, your dissertation topic is so appropriate, because what we are really looking at is establishing a sense of belonging early on in the Latino student college career. It's really critical. And then cultivating that social capital through supportive relationships, I think is also something that we pay a lot of attention to. So I'll talk a little bit with my CASI hat. CASI's approach is really congruent with inclusive science approach to build the infrastructure of support for the Latinx students to pursue pathways to the professoriate and advanced levels of industry. So we put a lot of emphasis on faculty development, because we really want to instill an asset-based approach and look at more systemic change. But we have focus on implementing what we would call culturally responsive norms and practices that support the Latinx students. And we have done it through some models, the Affinity Research Group model. We have allyship programs. We also have a FellowNet program that helps students put together competitive fellowship packets so that they can be funded. Financial is a huge deterrent for the students to move on. I think that family is also important, as Marianne mentioned, bringing in the family and understanding what it means to get a graduate degree, or even going off to a summer intern research experience, for instance. But we have had a number of partnerships focused on really diversifying computing. I mentioned the Google funding, and that's really focused on providing funding for research projects that will involve an R1 HSI with a non-PhD granting HSI, and providing financial support to the students in areas that are important to Google. Another really important thing that we're in the process of starting now, and that is creating what we're calling a CASI Doctoral Scholars Network. Because there's so few Hispanics in computing across the institutions that we're working with, we have reached out to Dr. Jessica Rivera. She's a postdoc with Dr. Anne-Marie Nunez, who just joined UTEP to lead the Diana Natalicio Institute for Hispanic Student Success. But she is coming in with another professor in computer science to provide support structures, looking at social, personal, academic, and professional. So building a strong sense of community. This will be done virtually, but we'll also have time for in-person opportunities for people to meet, but really striving for that support toward research excellence, providing support for writing dissertations, for looking at research questions, and then cultivating a growth mindset so that there's this deliberate practice of skills and then also reflection. From a UTEP side, professionally, we have created a master's professional degree program. We're one of 21 across the nation that's certified by the National Security Agency. on academic excellence for cyber operations and cyber defense. And so we put a lot of attention into developing that particular expertise. And then students are give 2 years to the government in a sense, to repay the fellowship that they need to go through graduate studies.
Andrea, I just wanted to mention one thing that I think is very important on what Dr. Villarreal and what Dr. Gates have mentioned. And again, going back to your dissertation topic to a certain extent, is the fact that in many cases, when universities like UIC and others became HSI institutions, the focus was on, it's like retention, but that has an idea of the students that come with an academic disadvantage, students that come with what we call an academic deficit, and they are at risk because of academic deficit. What some of the perhaps Ivy Leagues and other universities, large universities that are not Hispanic institutions have shown or taken advantage of is that we have perhaps not built the infrastructure to retain those that don't have the academic challenges, but are actually academically gifted. But since we were not focusing on the success of those students, they have gone to other institutions. And now you see many of our institutions building programs to retain the very best talent within our institutions, challenge those students with an experience that would really nurture their development. And that they don't think that, well, I would come to UIC and I would be treated like a student at risk from some of our student success units. So we just did a reorganization here at UIC, which we have realigned all our success units, as well as admission, financial aid, enrollment, retention, success units, and it includes the undergraduate research office as part of that realignment to make sure that it's about academic success for everyone. And we have to tailor it to all the needs of our students and not continue to treat the minorities and some of the, not only the Hispanics, but also our African-American students as the students with academic challenges and at risk because of that, because they're not. They have high potential. We need to celebrate and empower and fuel that in our institutions as well.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Dr. Gates, Dr. Villarreal, and Dr. Reyes for those, the insight and the input, because it's really important to really start thinking about the student success work. It tiene que incluir not only the undergraduates, but also thinking about the graduate learners. If we're thinking about student success, it can't only stop with baccalaureate degrees, because what message are we sending? So you touched a little bit, Dr. Reyes, on the sort of the language, the at risk, right? From moving from at risk to more at promise, right? The deficit language, that sort of also plays a part in sort of sense of belonging. So this question, I'm going to start that off with you, Dr. Reyes, if that's okay. Higher education has quickly seen an uptick in enrollment of Latino students. How has this shifted the narrative from these students being a minority to being minoritized?
I would say that when you look at just the sheer numbers, when you become an HSI, you can legitimately start saying that this population of students is no longer in the minority. Number-wise, they are in many cases, I mean, you look at UTEP and they'll be the majority, but they're still being minoritized in the sense of how we are still trying to provide them the resources to them. Again, the students at risk, the language barriers, the assumption of financial need, that it's there, we can't ignore it. But we seem to still treat our students as if they were still a smaller group and that they don't have the power of representation. They don't have the way to carry more decisions, to be engaged in some of the conversations that will carry the institution. An allocation of resources for their needs. Again, we have high academic achievement students that belong for those communities. Why are we not starting to create programs for them like that? So to me, the issue of minorities and minoritized is it's time to deal with, you're no longer a minority, but you're still leading with systemic biases and systemic racism. That it's because that's how we thought we were going to bring more students to a university. We enacted some activities, some policies, some strategic initiatives. It was to attract the population. Now they're here. They have different needs. They have a bigger voice. They want to exercise their voice, as rightly so, to shape our institution. And what we're doing here is trying to, again, just I spoke about the success centers. Well, our cultural center, so how are they playing a role in educating us? Our faculty, who now we don't have a large proportion of faculty who are Hispanics, but we have a number of Hispanic faculty. Can they help us figure out what do they need on the faculty level as well? Because we're minoritizing our faculty as well, right? It's that we're treating it the same way, and when they are actually very successful now on their own rights. So it's changing, in my opinion, is to realize to move from minority to not be minoritized. It's about representation at the table, where resources are discussed and presented. But for that, it is important for Hispanics to realize institutions like UIC, we are an HSI, but we're also an NAPC institution. And we're also in a city of Chicago that is very diverse, for which we also need to engage better with our African-American and Black student population. So sometimes to move away from the minority and being minoritized is to play the role that you have to understand others that are going through the same and not try to just look for yourself. When you become part of the table, you have to look to the whole table. So I think it's about having a voice, but also having a sense of awareness that you're now in a table that needs to also be able to play with others and advocate for others. So that's what we're trying to create here at UIC. Make sure that we have the sense of belonging for the students when it comes to ethnic background, Hispanics, African Americans, Asians. We look at even our students, LGBTQ. I mean, all of them. We want to keep their sense of belonging for the individuals and their communities, but at the same time, when we're trying to shape the university as a diverse and as a given access and really driving equity, you have to be a voice that can understand that it's a group and it can only be about your individual group, even though it's larger now. It cannot only be that, but you have to be at the table. So it is that trick. Come to a table, give them access. But then the topics that we're going to talk about are the whole population of the university.
Mm-hmm. I love that notion of the majority folks. So it brings me back to this quote. What is it? With great power comes great responsibility, right? So knowing that we're growing so much. Dr. Gates, Dr. Villarreal, anything to add to that question?
Well, I think Javier did a great job in answering that question, really. +1 to you on that. I think, when I look at it, I always want to, I think it's really important that we think about second language learners. How are we really providing the resources to help our students be successful? So thinking about those that are caregivers and how do we provide services as a university at a place like UTEP where it's largely commuter. So, students are leaving and coming back. But if you're a caregiver, it's not so easy to be managing that time. One of the things I just feel like I have to bring up, because it happened recently at actually 2 different conferences I went to, Tapia, which is focused on people of color, and the Great Minds in STEM conference. But students coming up to me in the PhD program and literally crying because of the way they're being treated within their PhD program at a top 25 institution. So I think that when we think of minoritized, we're there at the table, but if our voices aren't being heard, if we're not being validated, if we're given the message, and one male actually told me that it was very direct. We stated to him that he wasn't really welcome in the department, or why are you in the PhD program? Those are the kinds of things that really, I think, are still happening today. And I think that we have to be very mindful of that. So when we start thinking about, being minoritized, that's where you are not given the agency and the empowerment to be successful. And we have to pay attention to how we message and how we do not tolerate those kind of behaviors. They're difficult problems to address. When I talked to one student, she just did not, it was a woman in that case, she did not want to leave the university, even though she was in that situation. So and, you know, the natural thing is find another advisor, find another institution. But these are important conversations I think we need to have.
Thank you so much for that, Dr. Gates. Dr. Villarreal?
Well, my head is just blowing up with thoughts, so I'm going to try to come to two, right? And the first is, thank you, Dr. Reyes, because you named it all right around those pieces. And so +2 on that one, if we were around the horn, ding, 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 ding. But I'd say that, piece that I'm a historian, I'm a US historian, so we're building this division around on the notion, right, that we live in systems that were built out of anti-Blackness, anti-indigeneity. And so we talk about the responsibility we have. Who are we going to be in building new systems? How will we not be complicit, right, in those systems of exclusivity and power that have been named on both of those sides? And so that the work that we do in disrupting is we're always having to replant those pieces that call people into the table, right, that give space on access on that. And we do that in our everyday. We also have an HBCU partners manager. So our two people I'm asking them to work together to disrupt that. We're separate entities. What we're doing is that we're educating and we're learning from other institutions that have great legacies around serving Black students, and in particular with MSIs now. So we have learning opportunities as a research institution. That's what we do. We learn, we apply, we build, we go on, and we continue to do that. So I want to name that as that minoritized piece, right? Also as a US historian, right? How do we not codify whiteness, right, and privilege, in our communities? And at the University of Utah, our Latino population is, we're seeing a mix, right, of major faith of our LDS students versus, with, our students who are Catholic. So, right, even the nuances of religious diversities in our communities and how we acknowledge those and work together is key. I need to say out loud, right, around that PhD student, right, I have the privilege of, Dr. Vicky Reese was my mentor, and the one that ushered me through and made sure I got a job. And, and so go back to great responsibility, right? Millie Garcia was my mentor as well. And, the one that turned me to administration. I blame her for all of this part of my life. But, the mentorship is still so real. The making the caring and tending to our students is still so necessary for those of us who are in these leadership positions. And I just, I ache for those graduate students who feel alone. And if you're listening from the University of Utah, my partner and I always try to make room at our dinner table for nothing else, just to feed your soul. So know that.
That's great. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Villarreal, Dr. Gates, and Dr. Reyes for the thoughts and inputs, especially because there were some points in there that I think are super, super important to sort of raise up again, and that the discussion on the anti-Blackness and anti-indigeneity that exists within our community, and being open about that and discussing that is a privilege in and of itself, because we can do that. And I think something I learned also recently that a friend of mine told me, she said, I love how much you advocate for the community, but you don't always have to step up. You can take a step back and step aside and let someone else do it too, right? Someone who doesn't look like you. And it's so important, because we're always in the front lines and trying to forge ahead and trying to power through. Just like, if we allow other people, and this is something Dr. Reyes, Dr. Villar, and you, Dr. Gates, mentioned, that like, we have to bring in other communities. It isn't solely about us or people that look like us, because as we know, our comunidad don't all look like us. So I appreciate all you touching on those very important topics and points for that. This next question, Dr. Villarreal, how can this conversation inform on the work of Hispanic serving institutions to indeed be serving institutions?
Yeah, so one, I want to say there's a question in here. I think we have so many opportunities to learn from other institutions, right? Institutions that have transformed. I going back to, what Dr. Reyes was talking about, right? And serving in Chicago and serving his students. Like, what can we learn? We don't have to create new. To be innovative means doesn't mean it's always new, right? It's about what is going to work here. How do we build community? So, I think this conversation is there's this there is a network, right? But how, I'm a big believer in picking up the phone. Yeah, still use a phone to call people and say, can we talk about what is happening in this campus and help us reflect on what is possible here? How do we borrow from you? And what can we share? And there's also shared resources, right? We share students. If students are graduating from here and going to El Paso, right? How do we ensure that our students are finding those handoffs? Because the serving doesn't just happen in this moment. The serving happens when we do outreach. The serving happens, when that's why we have Saturday Academy. The serving happens when we start to build the images of them seeing reflections of themselves on our campus. And then the serving happens when we share across. I've had the opportunity to be to listen to Dr. Reyes at a TIA council meeting, right? And I learned so much. So how do I learn from him and apply that here at the University of Utah? And I think that's our other responsibility. I love alliances work, but not everybody is joining alliances. So what do we do with the folks who are not in those, who are differently resourced, right? So to be Hispanic serving across our nation, as well as an institution, I think is part of what this conversation brews up for us.
Thank you so much for that, Dr. Villarreal. Dr. Gates, Dr. Reyes?
Yeah, I was going to turn to Garcia and Nunez's definition for what it means to be an Hispanic serving institution rather than just enrolling. But they say an HSI that truly serves Hispanic students incorporates an organizational identity that not only promotes Hispanic students' learning outcomes, but does so in a way that affirm and support students' cultural and familial backgrounds. So Anne-Marie Nunez did a case study she's been working, I think, for the last 3 years, and began to define what it means to have organizational behavior to serve HSI students. And this was done in the context of CASI. So she looked at 4 institutions, very diverse from around the country. But the first thing was to serve Hispanics, must employ a talent development mindset so that you are looking at how you assess talent more expansively, right? And emphasize the importance of teaching. So if you're looking at undergraduate programs, who are your best instructors that are coming with a growth mindset, right, to the classroom? Leveraging the students' assets, encouraging students to embrace challenges, and then to be able to enact flexibly in course, how you accommodate students in courses. The second thing was to create organizational structures and multi-level shared responsibility for student success. So facilitating access to human and financial resources. So financial resource just came out with the Pew Research study, came out a couple of days ago, talked about financial being the #1 reason why students drop out. So how do we really facilitate that as a university? What are types of industry resources that we can bring to the table to support student success? And then focus on really student-centered personnel. So Dr. Nunez and Rivera just published a paper that talked about the importance of staff and student success. And I think it's an important paper to look at, because many times we think it's faculty, students, but the staff are so important for the student's sense of belonging and identity many times and within a department. So tracking disaggregated data and making those decisions, and then strengthening the pathways. I think that was already brought up. I think, Andrea, you mentioned about, really having these pathways for students to understand what it means to go on to graduate studies, or what it means to go through an interdisciplinary, pathway. The other thing is just building that multi-dimensional student support, and that comes around academic, it comes around social, financial, I already mentioned, cultural, looking at values, language, and then career, providing those opportunities for students to go to conferences, to attend workshops. But really stressing the emotional well-being of the student. So when Dr. Nunez talks about systemic change and looking at Hispanic servingness. These are the components that she has pulled out as being important.
And yeah, if I may just add, I think there's one dimension of HSIs that we need to also bring to the table of serving. And it's one thing is to enroll the students, but the other one is to understand the communities where they're coming from.
Mm-hmm.
And can we, through their learning and engaging in their learning, really support their communities and economic mobility and entrepreneurship and even public officials back to their community. So if we understand it's not about UIC, if you know the location, you can look to the downtown, but you can also look to the Pilsen area, and you can look like Villita. Is it that I bring students, or we bring students to UIC to look to the downtown, the corporate America, the high-end sector, the tech sector, but do we also bring students and their families to understand the benefits that we can have for their communities? The possibility of even continuing education for parents and non-traditional adults. So part of being Hispanic serving, I believe, is at UIC, is understanding our communities and being able to, through enrolling of students, can we impact those communities in a positive way? And can the students turn around and see potential in their own communities, either, again, like I said, creating new businesses or doing social entrepreneurship, and reflecting through their learning where they're in that safe environment where they can do project-based learning. Can some of those courses be put on top of those communities and help them? So I think that's also part of what Hispanic Serving Institutions have. How are we interpreting our mission? It's not only what the students do here, it's where they're coming from, and can they also go, can an option for them be to go back and elevate their communities?
Mm-hmm.
And that's what we're trying to focus on.
I love that notion. It's sort of like a full circle in how we're reconceptualizing servingness. It isn't only about the enrollment and serving that one singular student that identifies as X, Y, and Z, but also thinking about how are we serving the family of that student, but also not only nuclear family, but also la comunidad entera, because that we know very much well, like a lot of the work that we do really isn't only about us or family, but it really is about elevating and providing voice and shedding light on our community across the nation, across the country. And I think globally, and thinking more far reaching, when I started this call, I have family who are calling in from South America because they're like, we have someone in our family who's gone further on in education and now is doing this. Did I think ever in my wildest dreams I would be moderating a panel with 3 phenomenal leaders when I was growing up? Absolutely not. Pero aquí estamos, right? And this is what we do. We provide voice and we foster this through our students. And I think that sort of really encapsulates who we are as a community. And I think that's beautifully captured in what all 3 of you said. We have a final question. It's a long-winded question, but I'm sure all of you will provide phenomenal responses to it. Knowing everything you know now, as a leader, a scholar, and an activist for Latinos in higher education, and during this important month to our comunidad, what is one piece of advice you would give yourself either when you were a first-year college student or a graduate student? Who would like to kick it off first? Because I want to give everyone a little bit of time para que piensen qué lo que quieren decir.
Well, go ahead.
I'll go ahead. Well, first of all, I'd say go to class. That's the first thing I learned was necessary as my first year of college. But I'd say find people in my position, or these, I always say to undergraduates and graduate students, I hire people and we do phenomenal work. We've talked about it, that high impact practice, the project in the community, the research project, right? I have a Mellon, I have an undergraduate student right now, a transfer student who's working on, I say to her, when you're out there, you talk about helping oversee a $1.36 million Mellon Foundation grant. own that language, be with that. But we can do that. We know that when we hire students to work on projects with us, they learn more about who we are. They're our best ambassadors, and they also get connections that they wouldn't normally have. We try to give that to everybody, right? But when they're in our space and they're working with us, they can also be their peer, like, oh, I know that person. And so it's about building community and connection in the jobs that they have with us. So find somebody, ask them if they're hiring, create your own job for them. You know, I don't know the jobs that I need, and sometimes students have to tell me what I need, and I appreciate that.
I love that response, Dr. Villar. Go to class. That is very simple, straight to the point, porque si no van para la clase, no van a terminar. Thank you.
Well, go ahead, Javier. I feel like I'm always stepping over you, so go ahead. And
No, I mean, I would say it's the one thing that I ask not only our Hispanic students, but every student that comes in. And when we do the orientation and I was in front of them, I asked all students to raise their hand. I said, and I'm not gonna, until all of you raise your hand, I'm not going to stop asking you to raise your hand. So everybody raise your hand until the whole room is raising their hand. And I tell them, now keep it raised. And I tell them that is the most comfortable position you should assume in a classroom. That should be your go-to. Raise your hand, not only in the classroom, but also raise your hand when you're trying to look for financial aid. Raise your hand when you're trying to look for a mentor. If you raise your hand, that is it's a symbol that you're looking for help, and it is okay to look for help. So what I would tell myself that I didn't do in my first semester in college, and I didn't learn during just in my first semester in college, but even when I went to grad school, I felt that I had to do it alone, right? And I didn't realize that it's okay to raise your hand and ask for help, not only from your classmates, but faculty, and to go to the advisor and to insist in some cases. And I know that many cases, advisors or faculty may not have the time, or the minoritized issue will come up. Just keep asking, keep asking. There's people in your campus, like all of us on the screen right now, that are invested in helping the students. So I would say raise your hand, ask the question, get close to a faculty member. I mean, we all know, we're all faculty members, you feed out of the energy of your students. So asking questions and reaching out is what I would tell myself to do. And it's not about being Hispanic or African American or Asian or Arab American. No, it's about being a student. You are a student. Forget about your ethnic background. You are a student. And at a university, you're there to learn, to ask questions, to do research, to socialize. That should be, try to sometimes just step out of the ethnicity side and just ask questions. Now, when you realize that it might be easier to hear it from someone that looks like you or speaks like you, there are groups on each campus that you will find that community to help you give that first step.
The idea of the comunidad, the community, is very important. I like that we said everyone has to raise their hand. There was something they would do at a college that I went to. That was the first time, because before it was like, look to your right, look to your left. One of you are not going to make it. That's when, when I first went to college, no side. But and then I realized when I went to visit a college to do a talk, the provost said, look to your right, look to your left, make sure you all finish together. And it's just like that idea of the community and making sure that everyone's in this together. Everyone's trying to figure out who they are in the college campus, no sabiendo lenguaje tanto, in a new environment. I think that sense of belonging has to start at the top. And when they feel that and they know that, that's sort of that servingness, that commitment, that community you have all touched on.
that's right. Very good. Great answers, everybody. I guess my advice would be to serve as an ally to other students. If we're going to change the numbers of underrepresented groups or Hispanics who attain degrees in STEM in particular, then each of us needs to be actively engaged in being part of the solution, right? Students, faculty, staff, everyone. So as my student self, I would work toward removing the mystique of what it means to be successful. I always used to think that there was a mystique about what it means to get a PhD, what it means to serve in your society, how you become president or part of a board. But if we can begin to remove the mystique of what it means to be successful and earn a graduate degree, emphasize the importance of asking questions, that's raising your hand, right? Building community, seeking guidance, and knowing that failure is okay. I think that this is the biggest thing that I think students need to understand, that it's okay to fail. That's how you learn. It doesn't mean that you have to leave and drop out of school. I mean, failure is about learning. And I think that that's the most important thing to emphasize. When I mentor students doing research, I always show them my papers that colleagues redline and say, this is natural. I mean, I go through 20 iterations sometimes before I get to the final piece. But I also want to emphasize that foremost, I think it's important to be kind to your colleagues. So Carl Smith, who is a guru on cooperative learning, talks about helping your teammates be right and not wrong. And so just coming in with that attitude of really supporting each other and each other's success, that everything we do should be around constructive, becoming better at what we do.
Thank you so much. So we have a couple of questions from the audience. We have a large audience just based on what my colleagues are messaging me via text, private chat, Teams chat, lo que sea, Zoom chat. So there are a couple of questions from the Q&A that are focused on increasing the number of faculty of color at your institutions. And we've already shared some resources that have been shared in the chat. Are there other strategies you would like to share with folks?
I don't know if what we share in the chat was to share with the audience, but if I can just quickly mention a program that we're doing internally that speaks to the needs that some of our faculty have. When you come in being a minority still in the faculty, where we still have, they're still minorities. They come in and the support system that they need to have are different. So at UIC, we created, Dr. Amalia Payares, our diversity officer here, created a program called the Bridge to the Faculty. And we get faculty sort of in a postdoc type of environment for 2 years. And they're just doing their research, but at the completion of those 2 years, they get into a tenure track position within the institution. So we've done this for 4 years. About 15, 20 faculty members have now moved within the 4th cohort at the moment. They have moved into the faculty. But for the departments to get a bridge to faculty, they have to submit a proposal of how they're going to support this faculty member. What is the importance of diversifying their own faculty? How would they give them the room for the first 2 years to establish their research and nurture them and help them build their network so that when they move to a tenure and promotion clock, when the clock starts, they have a better, they're standing on solid ground with their connections within the campus, the connections within their discipline, and elevating the sense of confidence. So that has been a way we're going to do 5 cohorts of that. We're in the 4th cohort. That would complete about 50 to 60 faculty members that will be brought through that effort. And with the hope that after the 5th cohort, if things are working, which we think they are, how do we institutionalize this and make it another way where you can bring faculty and continue to build? Because 60 won't be enough. We need more. So we have to keep building it.
Yeah, there are some resources already shared in the chat. So if folks want to take a look in the chat for our audience, I also definitely have to give a shout out to our Aspire Alliance team, the NSF Include Alliance to Diversify the STEM Faculty that's headed up from APLU. So give big shout out to that team. Howard Gopstein, you and your phenomenal team. Jessica, you guys do phenomenal work. So I congratulate you all. Doctora Villarreal, Doctora Gates, I don't know if you all wanted to mention something or any other resources that your institutions may be providing or considering or thinking ahead.
Something I think about and I talk about, and it's not structural, right? We could put a lot of structural pieces and they're important, right? there are many gaps. The notion of bridge to faculty, that is an important, right? The bridge building, the bridge walking, right? The bridge rolling. But I think we also have to change some of our narrative, right? We talk about We often want folks of color, faculty of color, queer faculty to be grateful, to have some gratitude, right? The gratitude of a job. And I remind folks it's their scholarship and their expertise that makes us the institution that we are. So I think part of the way that higher ed has, I mean, even when we've changed this with some of our first year students and with even our own communities, you know, it's a privilege. No, they've worked hard, right? It's, you know, and, you know, we say, you know, let's be, you know, we're grateful that, you know, you made it here. I mean, I grew up in that kind of family, right? That's everything my grandmother always said, like, you know, we give thanks, and it's important to give thanks, but it's also a reminder that our language constructs the narrative of which our faculty enter our spaces. So they're coming in as scholars, as experts, as teachers, as you know, in the professoriate. Let's name it that way, and build our structures around that, and move away from that cultural deficit language that we even use with our faculty.
Yeah, I just plus one on that, Marianne. I think that there really is, I think if you're a person of color going to seek a position as a faculty member, it's sometimes very difficult. And we have to really begin to think about, you know, what are the right support structures, but also how do we begin to change mindset of what it means to be qualified. And I use qualified because I really don't like that word. And so what we're doing at UTEP and is we're really putting in our hiring practices, DEIA statements, and using a model that comes out of Cornell, which it's really, Cornell, I feel, has done a really good job at really focus on evidence-based, having a rubric around what a DEI statement should look like. You know, what are you providing as examples of your experiences and understanding of diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility. And then I think that the other thing that we're looking into, and there's a couple of universities, I think Santa Cruz and I believe UC Merced has a model in their engineering college where they bring in a committee of researchers that are very attuned to DEIA. And they are providing guidance, right, to how we hire, how we make decisions, who's at the table. So really being able to push that out into the culture, because I think it's a culture change if we're really going to see a diversity of faculty across the U.S. at all types of institutions.
Absolutely. I just saw that the resources were just sent to everyone, because originally I said it was sent to the host and the panelists. Y ahí mirando que Tomo está diciendo, where are the resources? It's private. So, Robin, thank you so much for checking in on that for me and handling that. I really appreciate that. So we touched on, so that first question was faculty, was framed through the faculty lens support. But there was a question that came into the Q&A that I thought was really good because student focus. So one of the key areas for student challenges is in the area of undergraduate advising, both incoming freshmen and transfer students. What are best practices for addressing these gaps, and how do we change the gatekeeping behavior of weed out courses, especially in STEM, to recognize and address under preparation and focus on student success? Oof. Yeah. Who wants to take that one?
That's a big question.
It is a big question, but I think it goes back to, we have to recognize that not all students, even our Hispanic students, come in with the same perspective, the same needs. So you cannot just say we're going to build a one unit that is going to take of all Hispanic students, because some students may be already third generation college. They may be Hispanics, but their parents know where they're going, how they're doing, and they have excellent guidance. So, but you do have to recognize that some students won't. So UIC, long before I was here, long before any of this was, even before an HSI, created a unit called Lattice, and I'll put things on the chat for it. That has been the Latin American Recruitment and Educational Services office, and they have evolved from recruiting to creating a sense of belonging in a community, to now having mentors and success coaches, to also now having academic advisors, to now having also supplemental instructors, tutoring. So they have created, but they don't see all students. But if you're a Hispanic student that is looking for those resources, and you're comfortable or more comfortable with coming to someone that looks like you in a place that, when they have, instead of having the pizza party, sometimes they have the tamales party, which I always go to. Those are awesome. That would have that cultural affinity, you can find it. But it's not that we don't have a success center and a success unit for all students, including if you're Hispanic, that can go to as well. So I think we have to start understanding that students are, the spectrum that we're getting, it's not one size fits all. And you can't just try to, because otherwise we're going to minoritize ourselves. We're going to create an avenue. So I would say that that's where I would insist, create something, but don't try to make it for all. Don't force your students to go there. Put breadcrumbs so they can find it, but don't force them, because then I think that would be a mistake. Some students don't need the resources, and they just get frustrated when they're putting that in a bucket that they don't want to be at.
So at UTEP, we have created what we call holistic advising. And so now we have these professional advisors. So students are seeing the same advisor over time. But then what is really nice about it and unique, I think, is that they have a dashboard around about the student, so that they're understanding that the student is first generation student. If the student, there's just indicators of a student failing, like if they have failed a course in the first semester, they're likely to end up dropping out. So there's all these indicators that they look at to identify student that may need special attention or special advising. They look at whether you're a caregiver, for example. We're doing a large study right now around non-cognitive factors and trying to understand, what are some indicators of success, but also indicators of putting students at risk. So that has been a pilot project that has been quite successful at UTEP. We have seen a large increase in persistence because of that effort. The other thing that we do with community college, because especially with the Hispanic community, for financial reasons, many students go to a community college, right? And then they're transferring in. So we have reverse articulation agreements. We create pathways for the students. So with computer science, we would work with the faculty that were teaching computer science courses at the community college, and then align the content, the learning outcomes, so that students are coming with the right competencies. So I think that there's ways to really make sure, or not to make sure, because you can't ensure it, but at least creating those pathways so that students are coming in to be successful.
There was so much great stuff there. I could say more, but I think you have another great question coming up, and I know a lot of audience questions.
Yeah, we have, so I'm mindful of time. So I wanted to give you, that was the last question we want to touch on. So I want to give you that opportunity, Dr. Villarreal, to close us out. If you have any final thoughts on that student focused question.
To answer that last question, I mean, somebody put in the chat, and I think this is it. And I want to go back to what Dr. Reyes said, like, how are we able to shift, right? We have to be nimble, because what our students need, and once they know what they need, they might bypass us by 3 steps. So I think our resources, we have to invest in our professional staff, and in terms of their responses in their everyday. We talk about leading with equity here. So what are some of the very mindful, equitable practices that we start our day and our interactions with as just one start, again, to all the infrastructural and structural pieces that we know are needed, but we have to adapt and navigate with our students at the same time. And so I think that all of what we're talking about here and what I'm reading in the chat, we have the opportunity to learn from and ask those questions, what's working? And I look forward to that next conversation across APLU, because then that gives us the opportunity to reflect. I think I'm going to say this, our staff, our student facing staff, we do need, that is huge in how we invest in their learning and their engagement and their own thought processes of just that first moment, first interaction.
Absolutely. Absolutely right. Thank you so much, Dr. Gates, Dr. Villarreal, and Dr. Years for your time, your words of wisdom, providing us insight and input on how we're thinking about supporting our learners, but also thinking about how we're defining servingness, ¿verdad? It isn't only about enrolling students, it really is about supporting the learners, the families, the communities. The idea of they may want to go back, we want to go back and serve our communities too, but also remembering on important things that we touched on, a topic that we touched on, the anti-Blackness that exists in our comunidad. Also thinking about, there's a question in the chat by Delfín Bautista, the anti-queerness and anti-transness that needs to be addressed. The idea of intersectionality and conjunto, so beautifully captured and packaged in that phrase, and thinking about what do we have to do to sort of step up, but also think about stepping back and stepping aside, to letting others take it on and forge ahead as we have been doing for so long, and you all have been doing for so long. And I commend you all for your fantastic work. And I hope to see you all at the annual meeting. This is a shameless plug I'm doing for the annual meeting. I know everyone at the events is giving a big shout out. We have our APLU annual meeting, first one in person desde 2019. We're going to be in Colorado. I've never been to Colorado. I'm excited. I don't know if there's going to be skiing happening, pero I hope to see you all there. Y cualquier cosa, muchos besos, muchos abrazos, como dice la familia. And thank you all for joining us today. Cuídense. Chao.
Muchas gracias.
Gracias a ustedes.
Bye.
Hasta luego.